You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Sam Sklar.
Sam. How are you doing?
I'm great, Jeff. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. This is actually my first time being on this side of the interview conversation, I guess is the right word there. So I'm excited to not know all the questions in advance and be able to give some unfettered opinions.
That's a good question. That's an interesting topic, actually, is like recording shows. Do you send like questions ahead of time to your guests, or do you how does that work for you?
So that's a good question. Let's back up. I am the sort of lead solo author on a newsletter that I've been putting out with less frequency as I'd like, called Exasperated Infrastructures. And one of the verticals that I like to do is interview industry leaders, taking a lot of my initiative from your work over the years, Jeff. But I work mainly in text. So what I do with my interviewees is I reach out and find someone interesting who's either got a project that's just launched or someone with a different perspective than mine, and ask them questions in three major buckets. What have we gotten wrong in the past? What can we do better right now? And what does a successful future look like for you? And that sort of gets the ball rolling, and that gives my guests the opportunity to talk about their work or their ideas, and then I'll follow up with some different questions. So very much an open-ended conversation, but it gets people thinking, and you sort of get their top of mind ideas, because when they're faced with a blank canvas, they'll respond with what's most important to them. So this is an interesting format this time, where we'll be talking about specific articles and news from the past week.
Yeah, and the Monday show is much different than Talking Headways in that for Talking Headways, I either read a book or read a research paper or an article or something like that, one singular item, and then I ask folks questions. But then, folks will ask all the time, like, can I get the questions in advance? And I say, no. No, you cannot. And the reason for that is because a lot of times in the past when I tried to give questions, and then there's sometimes when I do because otherwise I don't have the interview, right? If it's like a mayor or like the political people are typically a little bit more specific about that. They're like, well, if you don't send me something to talk about, then I'm just not going to come on the show. And I'm like, well, okay, well, I'd like to have you on the show. So I'll send you some themes. But for the most part, I like to get kind of these candid responses, but also I find that if you give people questions in advance, they tend to study for the question, and then it doesn't quite come out right when they want to respond to it for some reason. I don't know what it is. I've caught people reading off paper too before as well.
I think it's an old adage from being in school of the preparation. And one of the things that I've learned in my years of schooling and having these conversations is everyone's got their own preparation. For a while, there would be group projects in school where everyone would write a script and then they'd read out the script. And I found that never worked for me. I'm more of a broad strokes kind of a thinker anyway, and can dive into the details, but would much rather have a general gist of what I'm going to say and then have the words come out more naturally. It makes it more for a better conversation, I think. Yeah. Even if sometimes I will struggle for a word, but I've also learned how to try to not say like or sort of or too much, but it'll come out.
That gets me a lot. But they're natural pause words, right? They're like I just did it. I just did two of them. Now I'm going to think about it. They're natural pause words. If you take them out of the editing process, nobody actually knows that you actually said them because they're gone, and they're actually something that you've put into your language that or your speech pattern that actually is a break, but it's not like something that messes up the flow of the thought, which is really interesting.
It's also the main difference between text and talk, where I can go back and edit out the filler words to make it more readable, whereas people are more used to listening to someone's natural speech pattern, but it would break up the flow of the words too much. And my process is always, I'll send a copy of the edited version to my interviewee and give them a chance, not necessarily for script approval, but to make sure I captured everything that they've said accurately after my edits.
What are you interested right now in, like in terms of transportation, infrastructure, policy, that type of stuff? Like what's most exciting to you?
So it's a really good question. I've got a broad interest. I tend not to dive too deep too fast because the world of policy changes a lot. But one of the things that I've been interested in, and I've been reaching out to so many different friends to explain to me how through running works and why we can't make Penn Station not a terminus, but a switch point and a way for our three major transit agencies that run through New York, that's MTA, New Jersey Transit, and Amtrak, be able to run more trains through the region and make it more of a regional hub rather than a terminus central point. And it just seems to me that there's a lot of different technical problems, but then there's also customer service challenges, and the way we communicate all of these to the public has gotten me pretty jazzed up. So I'll read technical stuff from Alon Levy, who is a fantastic source on thinking through the optimistic side of lots of why we can't do things here when they do them great elsewhere, and sort of compare it to the presentations you get from the agencies themselves, who seem to be looking for a reason to try and then find the one fault that will hold up a whole project. So I think the solution is somewhere in between unfettered optimism and just total lack of imagination. And it would really be great. And the way that I would communicate it is to my friends when I'm explaining why I'm interested in this is, imagine you live up in Westchester County, which is just north of the city for our folks who are not New York or New York region based, and be able to take a one-seat ride, not have to change at Penn Station or Grand Central to go to JFK, or start out on Long Island and be able to get to Newark. It seems to be a great regional power that we could use to unlock and more than triple the number of daily passenger boardings that Penn Station sees on a daily basis. And I think we can just be so much more imaginative. So that's one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently. And from my perspective, how can I write about that where I'm adding to the general pool of knowledge here? How can I take my particular perspective and write about it? And so I've been sort of something in my drafts for a little bit, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. Luckily, the way the pace Amtrak and our other infrastructure builders and developers and operators move, I think I've got a couple of years before anyone's expecting to hear something from me. On that, however, it's not to denigrate Amtrak. They've done a much better job as of late. So no hate there.
There's lessons there, though, for other places. I feel like Boston can learn a lesson for through running. Obviously, here in the Bay Area, we can learn the lesson, too. I mean, Caltrain stops in San Francisco. It could go, at some point, go through a tunnel to the other side of the bay. There's all kinds of places around the country that have these terminuses that might do well if they were extended and through running was available.
I think the two key arguments there are legacy and context. And while there are lessons to be learned, there are much different geography. There's different historical policy. You might ask yourself why North Station and South Station aren't connected. I've heard anything from it's a union problem where there's different unions that service both, and they don't want to necessarily have to figure out a new contract that works for both sides. I don't know if that's true. It may be partially true. There's also the actual tunneling and building more than one line to connect the two stations. But imagine, technical stuff aside, and I'm sure folks listening to this who are more technical than me are going to be shaking their fists and happy to take those emails as to why I'm wrong, and because I always love to learn. But it seems to me that if we think more imaginatively and try to get to a solution that might work, we might actually start seeing the regional power and unlocking these mega regions that are more forward-thinking futurists and urbanists are talking about. It starts with transportation, and it can't be highways.
Yeah, for sure. Well, shall I get to the ads and stuff before we talked about our main topics?
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody who's ordered bus and bike scarves. We really appreciate it. You can do so by going to theoverheadwire.com or email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I can figure out something for folks who want more than one. And I've got some discounts and stuff for people. We can get some percentages off if folks want scarves. I've got lots of them. And as we always note, thanks for everybody who supports the show on Patreon, patreon.com/theoverheadwire, or buying books off the Bookshop site. We really appreciate that too. Bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. I always get my messages up. And also thanks for folks for ordering the Cars Are Cholesterol merch. We really appreciate Richard Wazinski designed that. And you can follow him on Dick David Sketches on Instagram, bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. We also strongly suggest folks sign up for the newsletter. This is episode 158. We're live and in session. And as always, you can listen to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Feel free to leave an iTunes review if you're so inclined. And finally, we are coming up on our 500th episode of Talking Headways, coming up in a couple weeks. And so we'd love to get some listener feedback and feelings into the show. If you listened in the past, if you have anything to say about the show, favorite guests, favorite topics, favorite anything like that, we'd love to hear from you all. And feel free to record something short on your phone or send me a note, and then we'll try to get that into the show at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. You can send those in. We've done 500 of the episodes, so I want to celebrate with you all and see what you all cared about the most. So there's that too. The news. So here's a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter from the last few weeks. The newsletter you can get by going to theoverheadwire.com. We go through about 1,500 news items every single day, and we pull out the 40 that we think are the most interesting for folks. And then at the end of the week, we take the most popular ones and we put them in an item for Greater Washington, Urban Milwaukee, and Streets.mn, but also we talk about them on the Monday show. So with that being said, shall we get started?
Yes. First of all, congratulations on 500 episodes. That is a level of dedication unmatched in our space. So it's really great. I know I've been listening for a long time and happy to be asked to be on today. So congrats again. And,
thanks, man.
Here's to another 500 if you want to continue for that long.
Yeah, let's get to 1,000, right? We've got a lot more to talk about, a lot more things to fix, a lot more things to help, and a lot more things to sing the praises of. So I want to get there. And if you have any topic ideas, let me know. We've gone through a lot, but there's so many more. All right. Well, Charlotte City Council has voted 10-1 to purchase a freight line from Norfolk Southern to run regional rail and asked the state if the city can put a sales tax measure on the 2025 ballot to expand transit. This was in WFAE in Charlotte. I think it was Steve Harrison. Yeah, so Charlotte basically just asked the state if they could put a sales tax on the ballot in 2025. They also voted to purchase a freight rail line for Norfolk Southern and make it a commuter rail or regional rail line up to the north. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
First thing is it's a great way to jumpstart ridership when you've got an existing alignment that's either underutilized, or I guess the city/county or state has had this conversation with them for putting an offer in, obviously, that this is would benefit both sides here. So the first thought is it's nice to have a conversation about infrastructure where it's not about fighting for the alignment first. Now, my question is, what is the impetus for this purchase now? Is it a question of has the region expanded in population? Has the density shifted? Is this a novel look from the city to try to get more cars off the road, try to get people to try a different mode of transportation? And if it's done right, it can be really interesting. It's fascinating here because it seems to be function following form, in that oftentimes you will build a transit system or a line or two to match the current densities, and obviously you will then try to fix the densities on the back end to support the necessary ridership. But I'm curious, my first question would be, I'm curious to see what the density of Charlotte looks like and whether this is an impetus for more aggressive housing policy as well, because those two things need to be related.
I think it should be. The line has been on the map for their long-range planning for a very long time. The last time they passed a sales tax measure and they had a bunch of lines on the map, this was actually on there as well. I know that they've been fighting with Norfolk Southern about whether they can use it or not, but also Lake Norman, which is the destination at the north end of the line, at least initially in a lot of that planning literature. A lot of them were like, well, we don't want to vote for another sales tax unless you give us something. And so I think this is part of the impetus too, is the politics of it all. It's the same politics that happened with fast tracks in Denver too, where a lot of the folks on the outside were like, well, if you don't give us something, then why should we vote for your sales tax measure, right? And so that's part of it, I think, in part. One of the things I'm worried about, though, is that, freight rail lines aren't always the best transit lines, in that they, sometimes they'll pass through the city centers and sometimes they'll skip them. I haven't looked at that line on a map for quite a while, but I do know that, there's a lot of lines in that region which have done pretty well because the freight lines actually go through areas where people want to be. And so the South Corridor is a good example of that. Charlotte historically doesn't really have the densest core compared to many other places with light rail, but they did pretty well on the ridership because they were able to connect a lot of places where they could do a lot of redevelopment in the south end and the north end as well when they did the north part of the blue line. So I'm interested to see, how, when they build it, what types of policies they have in place, how they get that TOD going, but also, what the reaction is of some of those suburban places that have been saying, well, we'll vote for this if you give us something, and now you have something, so will you vote for it?
It seems like good politics to have that conversation. It's sort of, it could look like patronage. It could look sort of a giveaway because you shouldn't have to necessarily, bribe is the wrong word, but you shouldn't necessarily have, but it's horse trading, and it's good politics to be able to get the suburban communities involved who have historically, in lots of places around the US, voted against transit and rail lines for various reasons, some of which being demographic, some of which being outright racism.
Yeah.
But I think if they can sort of build a big tent here, it could be a model for other places in North Carolina and around the country for thinking about how to repurpose rails for things other than trails, which are fantastic. Rails to trails projects are great for specific commutes and specific trip origins and destinations. I think it comes down to what the alignment looks like, and if they can get the right hand following the left hand, where housing and transportation are on the same page with economic development. So one of the ways I'll describe planning and why it's such a challenge to get anything done is the visual of a big rubber band ball. Which one do you pull on first to get the other rubber bands to either come easily or not necessarily get knotted in themselves? And that visual always helps me to center myself when I'm thinking a problem is way too challenging to tackle. Is you got to start somewhere, and oftentimes it is the transportation because it's the most visible infrastructure in and around our cities. But housing, economic development, we can't forget creative arts, and we can't forget people who are not necessarily historically involved in this process as well. So there's a big equity component here to be able to provide new access for folks who potentially live on the outskirts where transit or other infrastructure has traditionally been run.
Yeah. The sales tax would also boost bus funding by about 50% annually. So that's good to increase service in on those areas as well. Building nice shiny rail lines is nice, but we also want to increase service and the headways and all that stuff along the system. Last time in 2006, when Charlotte had did the vote for the sales tax that built this, the blue line and other things, they actually were able to increase ridership 100% because over the whole system, because they did invest a lot in the buses. The trains get a lot of attention, but the bus system, gets love as well in these, which is nice. And I like to see that too, which was also kind of a sticking point for the legislature, right? Where they're asking the state whether they can actually have this election in 2025. The state initially came back when they asked the first time, they said, well, you have to rejigger this so that, you don't spend as much on the rail lines and you have to spend more on the buses. And so I think that's been frustrating for folks in Matthews and other places that were told that they were going to get a light rail line and now they might get bus rapid transit. But at the same time, if we're getting that service increase by that much, 50% is a lot, that'd be great too.
I'll point listeners to a book that has changed the way that I think about city politics. It's called City Power by a University of Virginia law professor named Richard Schrager. He's been a big supporter of my work, and he was one of the first people I interviewed for my newsletter over 4 years ago. And his whole book is sort of about the distinction and the separation and the coalescing of different levels of government, both horizontally, so towns and communities competing or cooperating with one another, and also the federal, vertically from the federal level all the way on down to the sort of individual decision maker, and how these governments work together. And it's a great way to look under the hood and understand states' needs versus local needs, and how there's often a big bridge and a big divide between what the state is looking to do for its statewide goals versus what the local people actually need. And so what I'm hearing is that it's great that there's a dialogue about this, and if not everyone gets what they want, there's at least a process that's been developed for folks at the local level to have that conversation for maybe the next time, because let's face it, there's going to be, if this is a sales tax or a referendum state, there's going to be another sales tax for something else. And if people can start to see the benefits of what I get for the extra percentage that I'm paying on my goods and services locally, that could be a great way to start that dialogue and understand and build that heuristic of, oh, there's a sales tax. Last time we did it, it was great. Or last time we did it, there was this exact problem that we can avoid for the next time. And then that can be shared with other states that have a similar process. I mean, it's all about getting that learning, which we've just not done enough of, sharing our learnings and sharing things in context between a cooperative state and local government. So it's great to see. I hope this project goes forward, and I hope that the folks of Charlotte and the surrounding region can see what it's like to have a fantastic new light rail that can get them from point A to point B, or be part of their system.
Yeah, part of their system. All right, next up, Saudi Arabia's $25 billion metro system. Saudi Arabia is finishing up a $25 billion metro network for its capital city, Riyadh. When the system opens, 6 metro lines and 84 stations, in addition to 80 bus routes, will be throughout the city, capable of carrying 1.7 million daily riders. The contracts for the projects were signed in 2013, and the system is expected to open before the end of 2024. This was by Joe Edwards in Newsweek. Aside from the obvious kind of negative thoughts about Saudi Arabia, oil money, etc., $25 billion metro network just from scratch in 2013 to now is pretty impressive.
So you're coming to me at the right time. I've actually, in the last 9 months, done a fair bit of planning work and thinking in the kingdom. So I've had my chance to think about the future of Saudi Arabia, especially in Riyadh. I'm working on 2 projects in Riyadh right now. So I'm very aware of what's going on with this metro system and the absolute change making it's going to make for the people who live on the ground in Saudi Arabia. And I think that's an important thing to talk about. And obviously, there are connotations and problems that Saudi Arabia has with its relationship with the rest of the Middle East and the rest of the world, which are outside of the scope of this podcast. However, from their expressed now preferences as a kingdom, as a country, it would seem as though they're trying to lead on the future of environmentalism, rapid transit, trying to get people out of their cars and to use a new way of getting around for lots of reasons. It's very, very hot, and it's very hard to walk and bike in Saudi Arabia, reaching temperatures upward of 115, 120 degrees during the summer months. Similar irony of orange juice being expensive in Florida, right? That's where they make the oranges. That's where they grow the oranges and make the juice. But there's no real discount there. I'm not sure the everyday Saudi folks get the benefit of necessarily cheap oil. So it might be a cost saving and an equity measure. I know it's interesting to hear equity in Saudi Arabia in the same sentence, but in just this particular narrow focus, Saudi Arabia has done a particularly interesting job of planning a whole system from scratch to operations in just over a decade.
It's insane. I mean, it's funny too, because you used to go to some transit conferences, or even I think I was at what's the big conference in Las Vegas at the beginning of the year of technology?
Oh, CES?
CES. So I was at CES, and they had bought like a whole level of the conference hall just to show this plan off, right, for the metro network. It's technology, but it wasn't what I would have thought of being at CES, which was really fascinating to me too. So they've been trying to tell the world about this process too for a long time, which is really interesting too. But I'm just impressed by the sheer volume of it, the size, the ability to get so much done in a little bit of time, and something that possibly we would want to do here in the United States in a number of different cities, expanding transit networks like that. We just talked about Charlotte. Obviously, it's a different animal building a metro network versus building a light rail network, but something to kind of look at and say, okay, this stuff is happening around the world in all places. It's not just Saudi. It's I was just I've been telling folks I just came back from China. I was in Shenzhen. I mean, they built a subway network from scratch in the last 20 years as well. And so it's pretty impressive what can be done in this amount of time that I thought maybe wasn't possible when I thought about, how expansion happens in the United States.
So let's contextualize that. I agree with the impressiveness and the scale of building in Saudi Arabia, in China, in places where the state, and by that I mean the government that runs the country, doesn't necessarily have to answer to its constituent partners, and that in the U.S. is the federal government and its states, which have been either pro-transit or consistently hostile to transit, depending on who you talk to. But overall, we're not necessarily, and I think this goes back to the imaginativeness of, they thought of an idea and they have the money to do it, and they don't have to answer to anybody, and so they just did it. Now, is this always a good thing? No. So it's always a balance. I'm a big fan of context. Context is king here. Mm-hmm. The fact that I'm not sure how integrated this is with a future land use plan or future land use map in Riyadh. One would assume that There are very smart people working on this. So there's some connectivity where they would cite the stations would be where the people are, but what does it look like in the future? What are these travel patterns and habitable patterns look like in the future, especially as climate continues to worsen and it gets hotter and hotter? It's great that they're building a subway system, an underground and also an overground bus system that's going to be, I think, fully electrified and mostly autonomous. And at least if not now, then in the future. So it's great when you can have a state hand that comes in and says we're doing this, and they just do it. We had that in New York for 50 years. It didn't turn out particularly well for some things, but other things are, the master builder of New York, Robert Moses, a very complicated figure. Most people think he's an evil figure in history, and I think it's hard to argue against that necessarily. He did a lot of interesting, not necessarily great forethought on terms of how people are getting around the city, but he also was able to get stuff done. And I know our current mayor would like to have that power, Mayor Adams, but has no imagination himself and when it comes to transportation either. So
nor the governor.
it's an interesting. It's or the governor. Yeah, let's not get into that. That could be the whole other episode. But yeah, it's interesting what you can do with an unlimited purse and no oversight.
Yeah,
you get a $25 billion metro system that's operational, and yeah, I'm excited to see what opening day looks like and what ridership projections look like if Saudis are used to riding metro, and see what the mode shift looks like in the next 5-10 years. If they can even make a dent on getting people out of their cars for many trips, that would be a huge boon to the air quality, to the noise and vibration pollution of the city, and be able to keep people cool and comfortable as they get around at Riyadh, as Riyadh looks to expand as well. So it's a really interesting project. I'm really excited to see how it turns out. And I think the perspective that I would like people to take away from this is think about the Saudi people on the ground, just everyday people, and not necessarily try to shoehorn an opinion about Saudi government and how they interact with the rest of the world. This is a project, for whatever the other reasons are, is a project that I think will help a lot of Saudi people and visitors get about their daily lives in a safer and more comfortable way than getting in a single occupancy vehicle. So it's my piece about that.
The climate policies that work best. A new study that looked at 1,500 climate policies across 41 countries over 24 years suggests that the ones that work best at reducing emissions are those that work in combination with others to create synergy. The study found 63 instances of drastic reductions in emissions, but also found that pricing emissions was an effective policy, whether that was a carbon pricing or a cap and trade program. This was by Kate Yoder in Grist. So basically, using machine learning, they analyzed 1,500 policies across 41 countries, found just 63 instances where countries substantially slashed emissions.
So this is an interesting one, and we had chatted a little bit about how there was a lot of doom and gloom going on in the world, and it's really interesting. And you reminded me that there are good things, and especially this good, I think, a really interesting use of AI and machine learning to be able to analyze a large data set that would take everyday people weeks to be able to suss out, and probably not come up with a similar type of analysis with as much statistical heft. I think this is fascinating. I think a lot of economists know this, that the best economic policy is often one that draws from a lot of different theories, the ones that aren't drenched in political movement making. So, not necessarily a single school of economic thought, but one, again, and I'll bring this up as context is king, that works for the specific time, place, and need is right. And one of the quotes that I found interesting from Professor Wagner at Columbia Business School is that this finding shouldn't necessarily be applied to future policymaking. I think that's a fascinating way to just make sure that just because we have a big set of data and there's some sort of clarity on the information based on past performance, we still need to make sure that the future policy is driven by current context and current need as much as past performance and what's worked elsewhere. So it was a fascinating read, this article. I recommend folks try to wrap their head around this article. Again, it's just it's one of those sort of summaries of scientific journal, which is a summary of science. So it waters down the findings to a point where it's readable, which is a good thing. But another thing that I think is really interesting is the lack of a singularity, where they've talked about how carbon pricing is not a silver bullet, even though for lots of folks it is a policy to push first and only in some cases. And I understand that instinct. It's something that people, especially people involved in the business world, understand about, using currency to value a good or a service, and being able to price something can be a particularly efficient way to go about thinking about reducing carbon emissions and other pollutants into the air. But I think this article my main takeaway here was it's got to be a combination of different ideas with carbon pricing. So that from a transportation perspective, that's demand management, that's reducing the number of trips on the road, that's providing people the incentive to do so. Why should I get out of my car? I don't necessarily care about the climate, whatever. It could be some people's attitudes. What are the other policies that can affect people's behavior? And I think pricing is just one of them, because you're an everyday person. You're not thinking about carbon cap and trade. You're not thinking about that. So how does this affect me and my daily life is part of the politics of this. This is always going to be political. The climate scientists will say it's not, but it always is. There's not even consensus on what a fair future cap of how warm the earth can get before it's irrevocable. And I'm not at all denying climate change here, but it's a question of, you got to either get people on board with your policy, or have a world authoritative government to say no more emissions, which is just not going to happen. So it's a question of how do you get people on board with a future that's not just big policy, but also little things on the ground.
I want to go back to something you said about AI, which is really interesting to me, is that, you can't use a data set to make something that might come up with something new in the future. It only goes to the things that exist already. It feels like something that we need to kind of build on is the imagination of people to come up with new ideas and new thoughts. And they mentioned that in the article as well, is there's a lot of policies that were never passed that weren't included in this item because they weren't passed because they were politically hard, or maybe they become politically easier in the future. But, the ability of AI to kind of go through an existing tranche of data and then pull something out of it is different than coming up with solutions that will help you solve it in the future. And so I think that's an interesting point to make about a lot of different things, and not just like climate change and climate action, but, trying to think about how we solve problems in the future. I come up with this problem all the time because I feel like, at some point we're going to get this doom loop inside of AI where it starts to reference itself and it's already, busting up my Google searches and stuff like that. They're already crappy as compared to before. But I feel like from a climate science perspective, I think this is a really interesting kind of discussion to have, is let's use it to kind of see how well we did to gauge our progress, but let's not use it as that future policy cudgel where it's well, the AI said this, so we're going to go and do this. That's not really the answer.
Yes. I mean, so let's bring it back to transportation and the metaphor that applies to in roadway design. It's a concept of near misses in crash analysis. Often it's either written into state statute or you follow the manual on uniform traffic control devices. I cannot believe I got that acronym correct.
MUTCD.
Notorious. That sort of governs how road builders should build for maximum legibility across systems, is the idea of a near miss. If you design an intersection or an interchange or some spaghetti road development that you think is efficient, but could potentially be dangerous for a user that's not a pedestrian or not a driver of a motor vehicle, so a pedestrian or a cyclist, if you're not out there counting how many times a driver nearly hit a pedestrian or there was almost a crash at this intersection, you might look at the data and say, this is a particularly safe intersection. We only had one crash here and it didn't involve a pedestrian or a cyclist at all. And that might influence how you're thinking about which intersections need treatment, which ones need a road diet, which ones. So it's not a be all end all. Data is an important place to start, but there's a lot of folks in this space that are thinking about how you can make your own narrative depending on which data you have. And I think your point about the machine algorithms learning from other machine algorithm produced content is a big issue that's going to influence, I think, a lot of techno-futurists and folks who are very bent for whatever reason on using AI to solve every problem, to use that hammer as a cudgel. As they say, when everything you see is a nail, every tool you have is a hammer. So whatever the 21st century version of that is, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But
well, that's interesting because we talked about Michael Batty, who wrote a book called The Computable City, and one of the things I learned from that specifically was that AI isn't some magical, all-knowing, omniscient thing that's happening. It's actually just the next step in computing, right? We had punch cards, we had Pentium chips, and now we have AI. It's just like the next step in how much computers can process. And so if you use that the right way, you have this kind of end game. And I think for transportation policy specifically, there's probably a lot of ways that you can use it, like you said, to think about or not think about certain solutions for problems that we have. But I also think that it's not very helpful to to deify it because in the end it's not going to get us to where we need to go if we just look at it as the answer. We're going to get some situation where we're looking up at a big computer, then the answer is 4, and everybody's going to wonder what the heck it means. So just kind of something I've been thinking about a little bit is just like, this is the next natural extension of computing. It's not anything fancy or special. It's just you can do more things that are you couldn't do as a human before.
There's going to be lots of amazing things, outputs and outcomes that AI will help planners with, but it's never going to replace experience, vision, people's experiences living on the ground and using their system and interacting with their public space. We know until we're totally uploaded to the matrix, there's always going to be the people who live in the real world. And one of the great things that AI can do is it can sort of generate what a future could look like, and that could be a great place for community members to rally around a computer generated image of a future system or a future development, and planners can do a great job of sharing a vision that's developed by for in the community, and they can spend less time fooling around in GIS or SketchUp or Rhino and more time doing the groundwork of doing that community engagement, which is going to look totally different in the future. And so I think AI could be a great way to give people their time back, as long as they're using then that time to not do more AI.
Yeah, for sure. Well, interesting findings in this piece. And again, we're going to put all the articles in the show notes so folks can go check them out and read the stories and read the articles and read the research that they're connected to as well. So find those in the show notes in the podcast. Whichever podcatcher you use, there's going to be show notes at the bottom through the RSS feed. School bus crisis. The Humble school bus. Humble. I said Humble because that's where I was born, Humble, Texas, but it's actually Humble. The Humble school bus has suffered some setbacks in recent years with driver shortages and budget cuts. In some cases, cuts to school bus networks have led to massive car lines outside of schools that snarl traffic, waste parents' time, and pollute the air. In Cypress, Texas, the school district cut $4 million from the school bus budget, but set off a chain reaction that caused a line more than a mile long to drop kids off at a local middle school. This is by Henry Grabar in Slate, one of our favorites. Yeah, so I know Cypress, Texas. I grew up, not too far from there. And man, this sucks. I mean, I rode my bike to school. I walked to school when I was in Bakersfield, even when I lived there, when I was in elementary school. And then in middle school, I rode my bike to school and then took the bus to school my first 2 years of high school. It's really annoying to see kind of what's happened to the ability of kids to be more free range, to be able to do their own stuff, to get to where they need to go on their own. I grew up in a suburb which had bike paths all through it, and we could go anywhere in the area with our bikes and not have to cross a major intersection. There were tunnels that went under the major streets, and you could go to the grocery store, you could go to the baseball card shop, you could get a Slurpee, whatever you wanted to do, and you didn't have to cross a major street. And I feel like now parents are so scared of what might happen to their kids. The school administrators are so worried about what's going to happen to their kids that we don't let them go and explore places or be autonomous kids. So we had this situation where there's a budget that exists, and the budget needs to be cut. And so the first thing that gets cut is transportation. And I don't think that's right.
This is one of the articles that when you sent me, I just sort of shook my head and got sort of doom and gloom about. And Henry is such a great writer. Mm-hmm. He wrote a book about parking earlier this year and told it in such a humanitarian way. He's got this great way of making you so unbelievably mad while still feeling sympathetic for the protagonist and antagonist in the story, that it's a very interesting read. And he did the same thing here. And he wrote this article about it's a niche topic. I mean, people don't necessarily talk about the school bus in their day-to-day life, but like all things in transportation, it has these ripple effects. And I would want to ask the city council, what were you thinking? Yeah, you got to save money, but at whose expense? And it's all about sort of the So $4 million you have to spend versus the $4 million that nobody sees to save this money. I mean, the costs of this are going to outweigh the benefits in terms of air pollution and just the sheer amount of time lost. And it continues to amaze me how folks who will complain about their sitting in traffic and will have lamented the loss the year before. Where is that anger and that frustration when these policies are being discussed? People, it seems that because we have such an individualistic transportation society and infrastructure, people don't necessarily think about how a single policy of collectivism is going to affect them individually, even though the individual is a single part of the collective. So it frustrates me, and I don't know what they were thinking. It's a question of probably nobody wanted to pay an additional tax or more money to keep this going, because my $50 a year I can spend on other things to do with my kids, or I can spend this money better than the government spends this money, is potentially how people think. And then something like this happens, and it's going to be nearly impossible to unwind. And it's so unbelievably frustrating. It's one of it's a spiral, like Henry talks about in this article. It makes everything around it worse. And I just don't understand. Okay, so money is a real constraint. I don't want to sound like a neophyte or someone who's not, money is a very big constraint here, and $4 million is not a small chunk of change. You got to be more creative about figuring this out. I mean, New York City is another place that has a busing crisis. The city is so unbelievably big, and they've got 1 million kids to move day to day. I mean, was there an opportunity, and is there an opportunity to put these kids on city buses? Right? They're trying to. Maybe it's one of the things they talked about here. I can't exactly recall if they talked about that in LA. That was the article, that was the example that Henry gave. I don't know what the public transit system looks like in Cypress, Texas, but if I know anything about TxDOT, there's
it's a
none.
Suburb.
So the public transit in the city was the school bus, and you have to sell these projects in a way that makes sense, not necessarily from a fiscal perspective, but you really got to get down to the heart of what it is a school bus is and what kids are missing out on by putting them onto cars and on their screens in the car, likely for an additional hour a day. It's these questions that no one wants to have a conversation about really in public, about what are we doing here, that this article really opened my eyes to. What are we doing? It continues to be frustrating, because you'll get people that'll speak out of both sides of their mouth too. It's like, oh, I don't want to sit in traffic with my kid every day. I want to do anything else, but I also don't want to pay for the bus. So I'm not sure what the solution is here, but it really riled me up that this is happening. I'm sure this is not the only place this has happened also. And it just makes us more dependent on cars, makes our air worse, makes us unsafer. We waste so much time. And it's just, I don't know why this is such a political hotbed issue in this country. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, not to be naive. I understand the history. To all the listeners out there, I'm not being naive about this, but I don't understand why we don't have a populace that says true freedom is the ability to choose how I get to school and how my kids get to school, work, and how my kids get to school, not this open road car commercial of what. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox here. I could go on forever about this. This article didn't piss me off. This topic is pissing me off, because it's just another thing that we've got to think about now that wasn't there before. It's got to be on our minds to think about, oh, how are kids going to get to school? They're going to walk to school. No, they're not going to walk to school, because they're going to die in our streets.
It's the trade-offs, right? $4 million versus, I bet you if the car line is a mile long every day for every school in the district, and all those parents are sitting in traffic, and their cost per hour, if you give them an hourly rate, how much is that value worth, and how much time, maybe maybe a month, and that $4 million is gone just from that alone, right?
Yeah.
And then you add on to that the lack of learning that happens in terms of geography when kids sit in the back of the car all the time. I mean, this is something that's been studied over and over again, but when kids are driven places, they don't understand, can't create a mental map of the places where they live. They can't, use a map or figure out where they are, because they're geographically challenged, because they never had to figure out a geography. And so from an economist perspective, those are like things that you can't measure directly, but they're there and they're real, and they last, they have long tails in terms of their impacts.
The opportunity cost is one of these unrevealed, people don't necessarily feel it in their wallet right away, the way they would feel something else. And so we've got to find a way to have a conversation about sort of bringing these opportunity costs into real costs. And not to hang on the paternalist in me, but we've got to make people feel this a little bit more in order to. Again, I'm not trying to punish people, but I think we've got to start making people sort of see the outcomes of their choices in order to understand the real impact of the policies that they seem to want to pursue. It's a real rough way of going about this, but nothing else is working. So
I guess you could argue that the people that are sitting in the car lines get to feel how that decision.
yeah, but it's not translated into them having to pay $25 an hour to sit in that line. Make the line $25 an hour to sit in.
Rather
they'll beg for the school bus to come back.
Of gas or the cost of, because people can't see the maintenance costs and all that stuff either.
People are not.
I don't see it.
No, they're not going to see this until it affects them directly, where they're seeing their bank account get smaller instead of bigger. But that's particularly unpopular. Find me a politician that wants to put that policy in play. I will go leave my job and go help run that campaign right now. It's not going to happen.
And we were talking about the kind of the higher level kind of discussions about this, but the basic, underlying things of this are pretty serious too. I mean, the aging population of bus drivers, the fact that a lot of the school bus drivers just aren't paid enough and they have to work split shifts because there's beginning of the day and end of the day. There's all kinds of little things too that feed into that too. It's not just like the decision and the parents and the kids, but it's also the drivers and the process of that too. So I didn't want to go by without mentioning that, but it's an important part of it. Is COVID really impacted that because a lot of them are close to retirement and got taken out of circulation in terms of being in a job or those types of things. So there's a driver shortage on a lot of different levels and a lot of different things. Not just school buses, it's commercial trucking and things like that. So this is something that's going to impact people. It's not just this, but it's interconnected. Like we always talk about, everything's connected in some form or fashion.
Last point on this, and then I think we might want to move on. But this is an area where it's ripe for a new technology. It's ripe for autonomy to be able to control these buses if the technology is safe. This is an excellent use. We see an aging population. We see a desperate need for drivers, and labor can be a big cost of operating these buses on a year-to-year basis. There's maintenance, there's obviously other operating and maintenance costs, but labor is a big one. And I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that we should be designing our cities around autonomous vehicles, but I definitely think that school buses in places could be a good use case. I don't want to say test case because we're not going to test we're not going to test this technology with the lives of our kids. That's not going to happen. I'm not advocating for that. But if and when the technology gets there, this could be a great way to implement it.
I think that's really a good point. And we talked a couple of weeks ago, actually, or maybe a month ago, or whenever this article came out, that in Japan, they have a declining population, and they're trying to think of ways, because they're not going to have enough delivery drivers for all the packages they have sent because of e-commerce and stuff. They're actually trying to build a conveyor belt between Tokyo and some of the southern cities, and so they're thinking about it that way. So automation is definitely on top of mind for a population that's not going to have enough workers to fill the jobs that they need to have filled. So there's certain places where I think that it's beneficial and it would work. Okay. A new study by Dr. Tara Goddard at Texas A&M University found that adults hold disparate attitudes towards private property, rule bending, risk, consequences, and externalities when those issues concern automobile use. She states, the terms windshield bias and motor normativity, I did say that right the first time, describe this phenomenon and how a system built around private automobiles not only creates automobile dependency, it also engenders further demand for autocentric ways to fix its problems. This was by Tara Goddard in Findings Press. Another article to make people mad, I understand, but I think it's a really big finding and really important research that Tara's been doing. It's not just this article, but she's been doing this for a while, thinking about the way that we frame things, the way that we talk about autocentricity, and the way we talk about car-centric cities and the way we create them, etc. And so interesting to see this in word form.
It's frustrating. It is debilitatingly frustrating. And you can ask the question, what gives? But I think it's a great way to think about and to frame this idea of what makes transportation such an outlier in this idea of economic thought and economic theory and behavioral economics. Why are people think one way about transportation and another way about, what example did she use? Drinking alcohol.
Or smoking.
Or a delivery or a chef bending a few health and safety rules. What is the big difference? It blows my mind that more people said that it was okay for a chef They also don't necessarily follow a pattern that's easy to follow, where more people said it was okay for a chef to bend a few health and safety rules and a delivery driver to bend a few traffic rules. That was an amazing thing to me. That there was of the strongly agree category that people put there. It blew my mind when I read that. I go, seriously? It's hard to say where people direct their ire in a lot of ways, and I think the world would be better off if we all just cool off a little bit. Because this is coming from someone who lives his life constantly on the edge, getting exasperated about literally everything. But I had a tough time thinking about how I was going to talk about this because on one hand, it doesn't surprise me at all. And on the other hand, the findings do surprise me in some situations. I also liked how they compared it across countries, US versus UK. And we think we're such a car-centric country here, but the findings were relatively consistent across both countries. So it really does make the case for this motor normativity is a quality that we've all sort of inherited from the expressed values of our four builders, if you will, who created the system that we live in today. It is frustrating. I'm really frustrated, Jeff, by this. This makes me so angry because I don't know what the takeaway is here. What do we do? I mean, how do you change? I mean, how do you change someone's behavior? So it's funny. So funny, haha, like not haha funny, but it's funny that depending on which mode of transportation you're currently using or taking, you think the other modes are just the absolute worst people on earth. It's a funny thing about behavior. You're a pedestrian. These cyclists, they're not following the rules, or they're riding on the sidewalk. These drivers are not paying attention to me. And the same attitude, when you're a driver, pedestrians are darting out in front of me, and the cyclists, they don't stay on their bike lanes. And it's an interesting way to think about perspective, I think, was the big takeaway for me about this. And how do you message perspective? And I have absolutely no idea. It seems to be a generational problem that we're going to have to solve. I mean, the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, the younger generation, are tending to drive less, right? So it might be 2 or 3 generations before these attitudes fully change, but we've got a climate and safety crisis right now. So I don't know how to square the circle. And this is an article that drove me up a wall when I was reading it.
It might be a psychological thing, to the framing. And, you asked the question of like, how do you fix it or how do you change it over time? And maybe it is something that ages out, but at the same time, like maybe it's something, the framing and the psychology of it need to be exposed a little bit more. And I'm not sure how that works or how that happens when there's so many car commercials on the television that tell you that you can go 5,000 miles an hour in your Dodge car. But it is frustrating. I want to kind of share what you were talking about in terms of the questions that were asked of the respondents, because I think it's interesting for the listeners to kind of see what you're talking about. Is like there's 2 questions generally that they were asked, and one was motonormative and one was just kind of a general safety health question. And so for the one you were talking about, it says, is it okay for a delivery driver to bend a few traffic rules to get their deliveries done on time? And then 53% strongly disagreed. 31% said somewhat disagree, and then 8% said agree. And then on the other side of that, it says, is it okay for a chef to bend the few health and safety rules to keep their kitchen running efficiently? And 70% strongly disagreed, and 20% basically said somewhat disagree. So that's 90%, and then that's 82%. Basically, we're on the opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of a safety question. They were for the car side, and then they were against the chef breaking a few food safety rules to get things done. The same thing for another one where they asked about exhaust and smoking as well, like, right? So, is it okay to smoke when somebody's around? Most people said no. Is it okay to make people breathe your exhaust? And people are like, yeah, that's fine.
It makes very little sense if you take all things at face value here. We've been conditioned, and for a while, a generation or 2 ago, smoking was very accepted in all areas of life. And so maybe we have to figure out the smoking. Maybe we've got to put a Surgeon General's warning on the back of all of our cars.
Maybe at the people talked about doing that at the gas pump. Warning, some sort of warning. And obviously, there's warnings for benzene or so whatever there, but like there, something that tells you like, this is your emissions, or this is how much healthier, whatever it is. But it's
totally. I mean, the conversation is going to shift faster than we can probably pass that law, because we're going to have a lot of zero emission vehicles. But that doesn't mean there are no emissions produced when you drive a electric car. It just means they're not necessarily produced at the tailpipe. There's still emissions produced when you manufacture the car. There's still emissions produced when you have to scrap the car. But the line that I was given, I forget who said this first. So pardon me if I'm just quoting this or I'm misquoting this. We should strive for a future where we drive less, but if we have to drive, it should be electric. That's probably right, all else equal. But it's shifting the blame around. It's moving the ice. It's moving the ice from one cup to another, basically, watching it all melt just over there.
Yeah, over there. Okay, I got one more for you before we finish up. Car insurance rates could jump. According to the insurance rate data, car insurance will continue to rise next year. Drivers in California, Minnesota, and Missouri could see increases of 50% in 2024. Nationally, car insurance rates are expected to rise an average of 22% in 2024. The increases are coming from higher costs of labor and car parts for repairs and increasingly frequent and severe weather events. This was by Amy Peachy in CBS News. So car insurance is going to get more expensive for a number of reasons. Car batteries are more expensive. Larger vehicles are more expensive. Climate change is more expensive. Stuff's expensive. It's cost a lot.
Good. I mean, I hate to be so negative toward people who drive and who have to drive for various reasons. And there are people who do have to drive for a job. Transit is not the solution for every trip, right? So I do feel bad for those folks who have sort of that inelastic demand for their trips. But for folks who can take a choice mode, whether it's walking or biking to work, potentially the cost of car ownership might price them out of the market. And the real challenge there is, how do we make sure that it doesn't price too many people out of the market when there are no other options, which is a big concern for me. I mean, believe me, I don't feel bad for car manufacturers or insurance or reinsurance companies here. These are not the people who I'm thinking about when I read this article. It's the folks who live in transit deserts. It's folks who live in places where the DOT thinks a bike lane is a stripe on a limited access highway and say, let me wash my hands of this. We've done our mandate type of living situations, which are most of this country, that live in places like that where there's not frequent transit to get to work. And so folks are forced to have to drive. And so then they are just eating these costs. The cost of car ownership goes up. The cost of powering that car is shifting, whether it's going up or down or left or right, probably down in the long run. So let's give credit where that's due, because the cost of recharging a battery is likely cheaper all else equal than filling up a tank. In these insurance rates, and it's always the things you don't necessarily think about that might change behavior. It's always the example I'll give in housing is, places that remove parking mandates. This is a big boon for excellent TOD, good walkability, fantastic land use, mixed use type buildings. But when you think about who the real driver is there, it's the policies is the first step, but it's the banks who are driving that in a lot of ways. They don't necessarily see a project without adequate parking, that's their words, not mine, as a viable project. So for them, that's a higher risk, that's a higher rate on the debt that folks will borrow, or a higher internal rate of return that different developers are going to expect from a project for the risk that they're putting out the capital. And so you're still going to see a lot of projects with a ton of parking, even though the parking minimums are removed for various reasons. And it's one of those hidden things. And at the end of the day, if you really want to reframe these car dealers as really loan makers, they're bankers that happen to, instead of selling a financial product as collateral, it's a motor vehicle. This just, those costs are going to continue to rise, the insurance costs. And I don't know if the cause and effect is going to get to enough people where it's going to cause the elected officials who represent them to start stepping in and saying, hey, we can't control private business here, but we can certainly control how we're spending our public dollars on not necessarily pouring more asphalt, but restriping that asphalt and making separated bus lanes and connected bike lanes, so that car ownership is truly a choice. And that is a true freedom here. So I think this is going to hurt a lot of people in the short term, and I'm not thrilled about that. But in the long term, hopefully the demand will shrink because the price will go up. That's sort of how this is supposed to work. But people get very attached to their motor vehicle. This is a major asset that they either own or lease, and it's a big expense of theirs. And so people are loath to see major changes that don't necessarily benefit them. And in the case of Henry's book, let's go back to Henry, it's the idea of free parking. And insurance is one of those things that you don't necessarily think about as being a major cost factor. It's just built into the price of admission of driving to wherever you're going. But if they keep rising to a point where it's becomes actually unaffordable, let's see how people's revealed preferences change. I'm fascinated.
There's a couple of ways this could go. One is the cities and elected leaders and everybody does the right thing and tries to figure out how to increase access for everybody, whether that's transit, biking, walking, e-bikes, whatever active transportation modes you can find.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's the insurance continues to go up and then it just gets backfilled by the state somehow. And I feel like this is one risk that we're running. And I've talked about this a couple of times on the show, and I had David Schleicher on to talk about his book In a Bad State. And I just feel like one of the things with bailouts of that happened during the pandemic and then also during the Great Recession is, they created this moral hazard, right? That allows people to, David talked about the trilemma. Basically, there's three ways things
Mm-hmm.
can go, and you can only actually do two. There's only the two-legged stool has to be three, but the state can only back up two, or else, and then the other thing suffers. And so what I'm worried about the most is we get to this place where climate change impacts housing insurance, house insurance, home insurance, and car insurance, such that the state ends up having to backfill some of the risk that comes with that, right? And so the rates go up so much. The insurance commissioners in states, they have control over how much, they can allow insurance companies to raise rates. But a lot of the insurance companies, okay, well, then we're done here. We're not going to insure any more houses. We're going to get out. We're not going to do any more policies because you've not allowed us to raise the rates that are actually commensurate with what the risk is. There's a little bit of lies in there too, because of there was a Shelter Force article yesterday, but saying that the insurance companies make way more money on their investments that they make with people's policy money than they do on underwriting policies and getting money from that. So there's a little bit of fudging in there too. But at the same time, I'm just worried that in Florida and California and other states, we're going to see the state actually end up, taking the risk. And then the people in that state, the taxpayers, are going to be the ones risking it, unless they go that other direction and provide access to everybody, which is the way we should go. But with the previous article from Tara in Real Life Focus, that becomes harder to see, especially as more people are stuck in. Sorry, I don't mean to make you more exasperated. I see you're grabbing your hair.
God,
I don't want to pull it out.
I didn't even think that the states were going to start subsidizing and buying down these rates with my tax dollars. I, again, have to subsidize driving because we just have no imagination to do literally anything else. Literally anything else but that.
Well, let's provide more access. Let's figure out how to do it.
I mean, you and me, Jeff, take on the world.
Let's go. Let's do it. All right. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it. So thank you very much. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you one of our transportation scarves. Also, we did a audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 Town Planning in Practice. Get it. If you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. It was on American Planning Association's 100 Essential Books on Planning. Check it out if you get a chance. Each chapter is its individual podcast episode if you want to download it from the site. Listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, theoverheadwire@gmail.com if you want to get that in. And again, if you want to send us a note for the 500th episode, feel free to do so. Theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Do that. So we're up to Puppies and Butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in other sections. Sam, do you have a Puppies and Butterflies for us this week? After all that negativity from the rest of the episode.
So let's do a quick cleanse. I want to talk about Scandinavian dramas on our streaming websites. I have loved these for my whole life. I have no idea why.
Where did you find the first one? Do you remember? Or did it just pop up and you just started?
So it's Borgen is the show. I think I'm just an effete, erudite prick sometimes, and I just want to do things to be different. So I think when I was a kid or when I was in college, I was, what's an interesting Danish language show that I can watch, now that I've lost my ability to watch The West Wing for the first time. So I found Borgen, and that just let me down this absolute rabbit hole. And I recently watched a retelling of the Thor story called Ragnarok, which is on Netflix. Absolutely love that. I don't know what it is about Scandinavian dramas and Scandinavian fantasy shows. This, you got to be careful you don't dive too far into the Norse mythology. So believe me, I'm not going down that road. There's connotations there that but this is Puppies and Butterflies. So yeah. So it's a fun way to explore other cultures, and for me, I like doing it in Swedish and Danish and that part of the world. But I just sort of recommend checking out Ragnarok or Borgen if you haven't seen it, for some really good political drama.
Do you like comedies
That's
too?
that.
Like, do you like comedy, like the Swedish or Norwegian comedies? Like, there's the movie that there's been a series like The 100-Year-Old Man or something like that. Do you know that one?
I don't know that one particular, but
Oh,
I
it's
do.
funny.
There is a particular dry humor in the Nordic countries that really speaks to me. Thinking about was that movie with Mads Mikkelsen called Another Round that came out a couple of years ago, and it was a very kind of a meditation on life with that very wry humor. The Worst Person in the World that came out a couple of years ago, just another one of these dry humor movies. And I'm not saying that other countries don't do dry humor, but I don't know what it is. I'm very interested in a lot of these dramas and comedies too. You're right. I should have a little more laughter in my life. I might be a little less exasperated.
I recommend. So if you haven't seen it, The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out of a Window and Disappeared is a great movie. So basically, this guy is in a nursing home, and he used to be a spy. And so he goes on, he sneaks out and he has all these connections because he was like a clandestine operative or something like that. But he's 100 years old, right? So, and then all these crazy things happen, and like it's insane and hilarious at the same time. And there's actually a series of these. Like there's a couple of them that are interlocked. There's like a sequel and stuff like that, and they're just funny. My family and I, we had movie nights during the pandemic, and this is one of the ones that popped up for us. And it's like, are you serious? This just happened? Like, it's so funny. So, highly recommend it.
That's a great rec, Jeff. I'll definitely check that out on one of the. It's got to be streaming somewhere.
It's somewhere. It's somewhere. I don't know.
It's somewhere.
Exactly
I will pay the couple dollars to watch it and support the big conglomerates that definitely need my money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know if anybody listening to this has a great recommendation, help Jeff with some emails and he'll forward them to me. I would love to fill Jeff's email box even more than it already is. But we love the interaction. And also, I don't know if you were going to get to this, but I'll preempt. If anybody has any additional comments or thoughts on anything that I said, if I was wrong in any way, I love to learn and be corrected if it helps the collective knowledge here. I've got my own perspective here, but of course, I want to hear other perspectives from dedicated listeners of Jeff's podcast.
Awesome. Do you have? Let's see. I should get my Puppies and Butterflies. So I've been just waiting until October. October is my favorite month of the year. The fall. I don't know how you feel about fall, but it's like my favorite thing in the world. And decorating for Halloween, doing all that stuff, I just am really excited about it. There's a bunch of Instagram people who basically that's all they post about is fall and like the leaves and all the stuff that changes and like the Halloween pictures and cool designs that people have for their pumpkins and whatever else. For some reason, I just like it. For some reason, when I grew up in Texas, it was the time when it stopped being hot anymore. And I felt, renewed for some reason. And so I really love it. It's coming up soon. I'm not a big pumpkin spice type of person, but I do like just the aesthetic of fall. And so all the things that are happening, the smell of a cold front, the way that the leaves fall off the trees. So I don't know how you feel about that, Sam, but I'm ready.
Love fall. I love fall has a very different meaning now that you don't have to go back to school every year. It has a totally different connotation now because work never ends. The cycle of just going to work is just, okay, here we go. I mean, some people love their jobs. I like the outcomes of some of my jobs that I've done in the past. I feel like I've helped a lot of people. We'll leave it at that. Really what it comes down to is I love sweaters and I love boots. And I think fall fashion is the thing that I like the most, of being able to be cozy without being cold. As you know, as a New Yorker, I'll be drinking my iced coffee year round. I don't ever switch to hot coffee. I think that's a very regional thing here, but maybe folks in LA do it too. But I don't think that's how a lot of people think. And my sister, in fact, never drinks cold coffee, and she lives in Florida, so go figure. But I will. I'm really trying to branch out from my all black wardrobe this year. I bought a piece that was sort of light blue, so maybe that will change my outlook and add a little more color and flair. So when I'm scowling, you know that I'm scowling, but I'm smiling on the inside.
Do you wear hats? Like, are you a hat person, or are you like I have a baseball cap. Like, I just wear a Giants cap. Like, that's what my deal is. But I think like maybe if I had a different color outfit or something, maybe a good hat would be good to add on. Leather cap, a newsboy cap or something.
I don't know if I have the confidence to put on anything other than a beanie or a baseball cap. I tend to wear one particular baseball cap most days, mostly because I don't feel like combing my hair, and I've sort of trained people to know that I'm coming in with a cap in professional situations. It is a good way to go. It's one of those things where you have to really just not care what people think and let your work speak for itself. Not sure I'm there yet, but I'm manifesting. But yeah, I'm a big beanie guy. I try to wear, every year my beanies get a little higher up on my head the more years I live in Brooklyn. So in the future, it'll just be a little bop on the top and provide no actual warmth or style. But yeah, so Jeff, I'm a big fan of fall. I'm pretty jazzed about it. It's been in the mid 70s here in New York in the last couple of days, and just being able to go outside and not feel like your whole body is about to drain into the combined sewer overflow that is New York City sewers is a glorious feeling after 3 months of swamp. So yeah, you left me on a good mood now. I'm in a good mood now.
That's good. Let's keep it that way. Well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire, at TheOverheadWire.com. You can find me on Mastodon, The Overhead Wire, SFBA.social, Instagram and Threads, Overhead Wire, and on LinkedIn too. Sam, where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
So the best way to reach me, I'll check Twitter or X-Witter or whatever people are calling it now.
I'm just going to call it Twitter and I had to switch.
Twitter, yeah. Every once in a while, I'm just at Sam Sklar. You can sign up for my newsletter, which would be great. I love to hear from readers, and the more people that sign up and the more encouragement I get, the more I'm able to sit down and write some thoughts. So that's just exasperatedinfrastructures.com. And look forward to hearing from new and old friends.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thanks to Sam for coming on this week. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was really was a pleasure to be here. I'm really glad we're able to do this, and looking forward to hearing the how bad I sound.
No. You don't sound bad at all. You sound great.
I know. It's one of those things where hearing yourself talk is always a little cringe. So I'm going to do my best to have confidence and believe in myself.
Yeah. By this time, I can't worry about it because I do it too much all the time.
No, I worry about everything all the time.
Well, we'll see everybody else next time.
Talking